Sanje Shinto Nidye Hwa Ye Chogye Nangda Shin Chuma Which verse are we on? Okay, thank you. So, verse 13, if you do not make an effort to think about true suffering and their drawbacks, you will not properly develop a keen interest to work for liberation. If you do not consider the stages whereby true origins of all suffering place and keep you in cyclic existence, you will not know the meaning, the means for cutting the root of this vicious circle. Therefore, you should cherish exuding total disgust and renunciation of such existence by knowing which factors bind you to its will. I, the yogi, have practiced just that. You who also seek liberation, please cultivate yourself in the same way. The incomparable master have practiced just that. I, who also seek liberation, should cultivate in the same way. So this is renunciation. Renunciation. Without renunciation, then all virtuous actions only result in maybe higher rebirth, You cannot achieve more than higher rebirth, right? Without renunciation, any virtuous actions you commit, you accumulate, will only result in higher rebirth. So, without renunciation, then even with 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 an incredible amount of meritorious action. That's you cannot go beyond that, right? You cannot achieve more than that. You cannot achieve more than a pleasant rebirth. Perhaps rebirth in the human realm, or maybe as a god in the desire realm, or as a god in the form realm, or maybe in the formless realm, in one of the 4 formless realms. And you cannot go beyond that, right? And even if you do achieve such high state of rebirth, a higher state of being, then eventually, negative thoughts, due to the forces of negative thoughts and their imprints, then you will again take rebirth elsewhere, right? And then sometimes from the highest, perhaps, without renunciation, all your positive actions, it at best, it culminates in the highest formless rebirth, right? But then you have reached your point, you have reached the limit, it's somewhat limited. You're still bound by afflictive emotions and, of course, karma, and it's just a matter of time before again you fall back, right? You fall back into the lower rebirths, into the lower realms gradually, and then it just goes back and forth, up and down in samsara, So like this, then this is what we call cyclic existence, right? Cyclic existence. This endless cycle. It's beginningless, but we say with renunciation, with wisdom, you can stop that existence, right? But without renunciation, then it is endless. There is no other way that you can stop this. There is no other way. Without renunciation, even if you have received many high teachings, like Mahayana teachings, tantric teachings, tantric from the lower, tantras to the highest Anuttara Yoga Tantra, without renunciation, then there is no way that you can free this bondage, free this bondage from destructive emotions, afflictive emotions, and from karma. There is no way that you can free yourself from this cyclic existence. So for that, then it is important that you think about, suffering in general, and then, think about the suffering of each of those realms, and then think of the general suffering, which is being in a state, in a constant influx of afflictive emotions and karma actions. So if you see that this makes sense, that this how emotions rise and how with emotions they bring about this wishing to be, that when we get a good emotion, then we become sort of attracted to that, and when there is an unpleasant emotion, then we naturally want to be free from that, right? And then that serves as the basis for our action, and because we have this wish to have pleasant feelings and be free from unpleasant feelings, then this really serves as the basis for further actions, right? For our physical actions, for our verbal actions, and ultimately for our mental actions. And mental actions is really, we say, volition, right? Volition. So if you are thinking, right? If you're thinking, then we are constantly, our mind is in action, right? When we are thinking, right? So as long as there is volition, then you're always creating a mental action. So this is like the relation between emotions and actions, right? Based on emotions, then we commit actions, because emotions are like the purpose for our actions. So in short, then karma and klesha, right? Klesha, which is afflictive emotions, and then karma, it means action, right? So actions, we say, then comprise of physical, verbal, and mental actions. Kleshas, then we term as the three mental poisons, right? Which is ignorance, desire, and anger, right? These three. Ignorance is a whole different subject, but desire and anger is something that we can all relate, right? That we have, at one point, we have sort of gone under their influence. And again, I want to sort of remind us that, in a state of desire and anger, then there is some fabrication going on, right? When we are desirous or angry, then we are fabricating something, we are creating something in our mind and then projecting that image onto the object, right? And what unites desire and anger is ignorance, right? Ignorance is the base, is the base for desire and anger, right? And ignorance, we don't mean being ignorant about anything, but when we say ignorance, we mean it in the context of being ignorant about the true nature of reality, the true nature of how things exist. And it just means self-grasping mind, right? Self-grasping mind. So the mind that apprehends, when we are apprehending an object out there that really has, that appears to have an intrinsic quality to itself, right? That seems so real, right? It appears as so real, right? not surreal, but so real, right? That appears as so real, uh, and it is, and just as it appears so real, if we then hold on to that, right, as being really real, uh, then that's ignorance, right? That's ignorance. So this is how we understand. This is our understanding of ignorance, and ignorance is not an easy. It's not an easy consciousness to understand, to get a grip of. And just as it is not easy to understand ignorance itself, then I think it is even more difficult to sort of pinpoint that moment and to recognize when it arises, to realize the moment ignorance arises within us. That's the most difficult thing, That's the most difficult thing. So to understand that, then we have to obviously stop looking outwards so much and then just try to be more subjective, try to see more, look inwards, right? Look inwards and not so much of the external world, but try to just reflect on our mind, right? Just try to reflect on our mind, try to cut out the distractions that comes from outside, right? From the five senses, from the gates of the five senses. So even for recognizing ignorance, I think it's quite similar, like using those analysis for Mahamudra, right? So we need to also sort of turn down, right? Or like power down our five senses. Because if they are really like 100%, if they are functioning 100%, then that takes away. It's like it depletes our the functioning ability of the sixth sense, the sixth consciousness. So I think to really see ignorance, then I think it also requires that, that we should also sort of try to cut down on looking so outwardly, and sort of utilizing, like fully utilizing our five senses. So that's not an easy thing to do, to cut down on the five senses. So therefore, even recognizing the moment when ignorance arises is difficult. Whereas something like, if we remember a past event, or if we are expecting something about the future, you are more conscious, right? You can be self-aware in that context, right? But if you are thinking, but knowing when ignorance arises, that's much more difficult. And then ignorance sort of lays, like the foundation for other destructive emotions, right? It sets the stage, it imputes this, it sort of validates, right? It sort of validates how we see things, right? It validates how we see things. And once we think it's valid, right, then then there is a base for saying whether this thing that exists is good or bad, whether it's pleasant or unpleasant. It gives us a chance, or it gives a reason to think about and to sort of add things on top of that, right? Once there is this real existence out there, then you can then sort of get into the details, right? You can get into the details of how things exist, whether they have a pleasant quality or an unpleasant quality. So when you then think about the pleasant quality, then desire arises. And when you think about the unpleasant quality, based on that, like their validity, based on their validity, based on that substantial existence out there, then you have anger, right? So, and then you have the other various emotions that are connected with those two main emotions. And based on that, then basically, then you set out goals, right? You set out goals in life, and then you follow that, right? So then you have to do something practical, right? So you then take action, right? You create action, you accumulate those actions. And like this, then this is how it sets into motion, right? This like train, the train of the 12 interlinked dependent origination, right? So it's like the train, and then it's like you have the engine, and then you have 11 coaches, and then the engine just pulls the rest of them, right? So it's something like that. Right, so this is like one approach, of seeing how things are, or why things are the way they are, right? Why are we not happy? So when we think of suffering, I think it is important that we try to think in the context of the 12 interlinked dependent origination, right? The 12 interlinked dependent origination. That way, then, I think one good thing is that then suffering doesn't then seem to be like a place, Then otherwise, when you think, oh, we are in samsara, right? Then pretty soon, samsara sort of becomes like a place, right? It's like planet Earth, right? And then like you're in samsara, or like you're on samsara, and samsara has some sort of like gravity that sort of pulls you into it, right? So I don't think that's the way. I don't think that's our approach. That's not a Buddhist approach. Rather, suffering is something that is very much a part of us, or a part of our present state, Suffering is that, and samsara should be understood similarly, As long as anyone, as long as you are influenced by, these three mental poisons, these three destructive emotions, afflictive emotions, as long as you're influenced by those three, and the actions that are motivated by them, then you are in samsara, Then that's samsara, the state of being influenced by karma and klesha is samsara. So samsara should not be understood like a place. Of course, we draw samsara, right? We do draw samsara, but that's only to give That's to help us understand it, right? But of course, we're not saying that there is a place over there that is samsara. We're not saying that samsara it's not an outside, it's not an external world, but it is the internal world. That is samsara. So when you understand that this, so also like how I said before that samsara in a nutshell is that state where things are not always going your way. If things are not going your way, that's samsara. Simple as that. I mean, how more simple can it be, right? I mean, if things are not going your way, then that's it. Yeah. So there's this funny story. Like, I heard it was just a few years back, and one of the geshis, he was doing his tamja. So that's the ceremonial debate where he answers, and then there are designated monks who debate, yeah, and this is to sort of celebrate like his graduation sort of thing. But of course, we don't see it like that. But just so that you can understand. So he was sitting damja, and the debater asked him, what is samsara, right? How do you define samsara? Define samsara, and the geshi had some trouble, recalling the exact definition that was in the text. And then this monk, the questioner, he had this reputation of not really being a serious student, right? So then he said, because the geshi couldn't answer, right? So he had to step in, and then he said, Geshe-la, how about, let's say, and there's this really nice word, we say, in Tibetan we say tamadikpa, tadigmason, tamadikpa. Tamadikpa is like when things are not going your way, right? It's to express that. It's also quite funny when you express it in Tibetan. So he said, isn't like when things are not going your way, isn't that how you define samsara? And then the Geshe said, oh yeah, you're right. The Geshe had to, he had to accept that. So I don't know the name of this not so serious monk, but this is his definition, and I like that definition. Yeah. So when things are not going your way, that's samsara. And that, if you think, if you think about that statement, then I think there is some deeper meaning, right? When things are not going your way, so that obviously shows that there is some disappointment, there is some desire there, and you didn't get what you wanted, right? So that, I think it really has meaning, right? It really has it teaches us something. So words of wisdom, can come from anyone, right? You don't need to be like very academic, right? Even, I mean, you can be someone like, what's the expression, like a jolly old fellow? Jolly old fellow? Something like that. I mean, this monk was something like that. He had a reputation of just taking life easy, right? But still, he had this word of wisdom. So, insight. He had his moment of insight. Okay, so by contemplating that, by contemplating this nature, right? This nature of suffering, then when you develop a strong wish to be free from that, and if you develop that mind to a point where it is spontaneous, then you have generated renunciation. Okay, so then verse number 14. Ever enhancing your enlightened motive of bodhicitta is the central, is it axle of the Mahayana path. It is the basis and foundation for great waves of enlightening conduct. Like a gold-making elixir, it turns everything you do into the two collections, building up a treasure of merit gathered from infinitely collected virtues. Knowing this, Bodhisattvas hold this supreme precious mind as their innermost practice. The incomparable master have practiced just that. I, who also seek liberation, cultivate myself in the same way. So now we're getting into the part of bodhicitta, the mind that yearns for great enlightenment, full enlightenment. So in context of the three scopes, with the first scope, the person of the first scope, then one thinks about the suffering of the lower realms, right? Of the lower realms, or should I say, out of the three types of suffering, then one thinks about mainly suffering of suffering, right? So this suffering it's a sensational suffering, right? Sensation, unpleasant sensation, unpleasant feelings, mainly unpleasant feelings. So if you cultivate a strong desire or strong wish to be free from mainly the suffering of the lower realms or the suffering of suffering, mainly unpleasant feelings, then you gradually then enter the path of the small scope. Now, if you contemplate not just the first type of suffering, but all three, and primarily the third type of suffering, the all-pervasive suffering, then you cultivate, by contemplating this suffering, then you cultivate renunciation, right? And if you not only use yourself as the basis of that contemplation, and if you then broaden, if you broaden the basis of your cultivation of suffering or contemplation of suffering, and if you start to include more and more, and if you include all sentient beings who suffer, mainly by the third type of suffering, all-pervasive suffering, which is the fact that one is constantly influenced by destructive emotions and actions. That fact is all-pervasive suffering, right? That is suffering. And if you think of that fact, using all sentient beings who suffer, then that develops, into, then the person then will enter the path of the great scope. But I think I didn't say that. I think I forgot to say that if you contemplate the third type suffering, primarily using yourself as the basis, then you gradually enter the path of the medium scope. And if you include everyone and use that as a basis for contemplating the third type of suffering, then you gradually enter the path of the great scope. So with each scope, right, with each part of the scope, then you broaden your understanding, and then you also broaden the basis of your meditation, of your contemplation, and being more inclusive rather than exclusive. Now, to generate this mind, bodhicitta, we say the king of all wishes, right? The king of all minds. Then in the Lamrim, then it is explained there are two methods to develop bodhicitta. The 7 cause and effect, right? The 7 cause and effect instruction, and then exchanging self and others, exchanging self with others, right? So with the first, of course, the first cause is recognizing that everyone as your mother, right? Recognizing everyone as your mother. And how we go on about that is that since since our mind, right? Since our mind have no beginning, then since the mind has no beginning, right? Then we have since beginningless, right? We have sort of taken countless rebirths, right? Countless rebirths. And for each rebirth, then we need mothers, right? We need mothers. Of course, now we are excluding some other kind of rebirths where there are no right parents, but mostly we need to rely on a mother, right? So we use this logic, right? So we have taken countless rebirths, and for each rebirth we need to rely on a mother, and therefore we cannot say that this sentient being at one time was not the mother of one of my previous rebirths. We cannot say this. So therefore, then we use this like this logic. Then we try to recognize as everyone as having been our mother at one point. But before this, then we have to first think of equanimity, right? Equanimity. This is very important. Equanimity. It's because right now, in our present state, we feel very close to our loved ones, right? We have strong attachment to them, and then to enemies we feel very distant. So with equanimity, then we try to not have a very strong attachment to our loved ones, and at the same time then try not to feel, to not hold our enemies in great adversity or animosity or aversion. So we try to minimize that. Try try to minimize those feelings. And then the method used here is to think that just as our, just as like for example, our loved ones, if we have a very strong desire, attachment towards them, then we contemplate the fact that they are our loved ones in this life, but at one point, they have been also our enemies, right? And then we look at our enemies, and to decrease the strong feeling of aversion, then we think they may be our enemies right now, but at one point they were our loved ones, right? So with these two way of looking at our loved ones and the enemies, then we try to make them more equal, right? We try to be more to develop some like a sense of neutrality towards those, right? So this is the method, and once you do that, then you think of the first cause, recognizing all sentient beings as having been our mothers. And then the second one is to think about their kindness, their kindness when they were our mothers, and not only as our mothers, but also when they are not our mothers, they're equally kind, we say, right? And as we talked about, as we also spoke a few days back, if you think about it, then we say sentient beings are kind to us, right? Sentient beings are kind. They are very kind, because if you think about it, then all the things that we have, they come from sentient beings, right? Without the help of fellow sentient beings, then even though we might have lots of wealth, or we might have many things, many material possessions, but if there are no other sentient beings, then what can we do, right? What can we do? For example, let's say you have a very good car, but if your car breaks down and there are no one who can fix them, then what can you do, right? Right? What can you do? I mean, you could have the best car, right? But if your car breaks down and no one can fix it for you, then you're stuck, right? Or like you can go to a restaurant, and if the cook decides to, suddenly, take his holiday or something, or changes his mind, and then suddenly decides that, like change of career at that moment, and just leaves the kitchen, then what can you do, right? I mean, you could be like in a 5-star restaurant, right? Like with 5 Michelin stars or whatever. But if the chef, decides that, change of career at that crucial moment, just as you're about to give the order, then you're not going to get what you ordered, right? So like that, we really, even for a small thing like going to the restaurant and getting what we want, that depends. First, I don't want to use the word kindness first, but what is important is that we have to depend on others, right? We must depend on others in order to get something that we want, This is a fact. And then we use the word kindness, to really show, I think, our appreciation, It's not like we say, oh, my parents are kind to me. Maybe the chef in that restaurant, the cook in the restaurant isn't kind to you like your mother is kind to you, because the cook probably was doing this because it's his job, right? It's not like he has good feelings for you, or he's doing this out of love and compassion. Maybe he might, but not necessarily so. Still, if he doesn't cook for us, then we're not going to get the food, right? And to show that appreciation, then we use this word, due to his kindness, right? Due to the kindness of sentient beings, then they help us, they help us in fulfilling our wishes, in fulfilling whatever wishes that we have. So this is to develop, when we use the word kindness, whether they are kind to us or not is not the key word here. That's not the important subject. What is important is that to bring a sense of appreciation, to bring a sense of closeness to them, and to just, appreciate them for what they did, So I think this is a very good method. Yeah. And then, all right, so this is remembering the kindness, of sentient beings when they were our mother, and also when they are not our mothers, right? And with mothers, I don't think, I need to talk about this because it's so obvious, that our mother is so kind, right? But I think the people who can really understand the mother's kindness are the mothers, right? I think the mothers they really know that because of their love for their children. They really know that. Yeah. And then repaying that kindness is again important, thoughts of how you can do something beneficial for them, what can you do after remembering all that kindness, after appreciating for what they have done for you. If you just appreciate them and full stop, then what happens next, right? Then you need to think of a way to benefit, this is repaying kindness. So we think this way, and then the fourth is loving kindness. I think loving kindness, and this is so here in the liberation in the palm of your hand. It says, the fourth cause, meditating on the love that comes from the force of attraction, right? So maybe this is like yesterday we were saying, like attraction, or maybe acceptance, right? Acceptance, I think, might be a better word. I don't know. Meditating on the love that comes from the force of acceptance, accepting the other person. Attraction sounds, that might have like a different connotation, right? It's like you feel attracted to the person, and then that might have like a different, I don't know. It's almost like, it sounds more closer to desire when you use the word attraction. Whether I think here the fourth cause is really accepting the person, right? Accepting the person. As last night we had this talk, right? So I think she said acceptance, and I think this we can, if we put it here, then I think this makes sense. But maybe it's my understanding of that word. I don't know. And then the fifth cause is the great compassion. The great compassion. So this compassion, generally we have, I think, compassion, right? We do have compassion, but it is somewhat limited, also maybe biased, right? Like we do have like a form of compassion that's biased, because it's so strongly connected with desire, attachment. But then this great compassion, it's not bound by desires, right? It's not bound by desires. It is it's I think having compassion for it's compassioning. No, it's compassion. It's having compassion for humans or for animals, for sentient beings, for who they are, rather than for what they are, right? I think most of our compassion, we are having compassion not really for who they are, but really for what they are, right? What they mean to us, or it's about relationships, right? Where we would put them in this category, right? In this category. So really for who they are. If you have this compassion, then it's easy, that just as you have a compassion for this person, you would also have the compassion for the other person, because they are people, right? Because they are sentient beings, right? So if this is the reason for your compassion, if this is the reason for why you're being compassionate, then you should be able to apply this to all sentient beings, right? So really having compassion for who they are rather than for what they are. And in a way, I think this is maybe it's less self-centered, right? Whereas other forms of compassion, like most of our compassion, that's little self-centered, right? That's always like the source, and then it sort of then uses that self-centered approach, and then has some form of compassion. And then what's after great compassion? What's the word? Oh, okay. Here it says the sixth cause, altruism, or right resolve. What was it? What? Special resolve. Okay. So this is the wish. So in the great compassion level, when in that stage, in the fifth cause stage, you had a very strong compassion. You have a strong wish that sentient beings be free from suffering. Whereas in the sixth cause, then you are taking on that responsibility of doing something about it, right? Of trying to free sentient beings from suffering, from samsara. So then you realize that you are somewhat limited, right? You are limited. At this point, don't even think about all sentient beings. Even trying to benefit one sentient being is quite a challenge. So then this is why bodhicitta comes into the picture, because if you, to really benefit sentient beings, then first you have to sort of perfect your capacity, or sort of truly realize your potential, right? To realize your potential. And Buddhahood represents that. Buddhahood represents that perfect nature, the perfect quality to benefit, of having the ability to benefit sentient beings when the time comes, right? So then gradually, knowing that right now at this point you cannot benefit even one sentient being completely, then when you think of the different, and one of the biggest inhibiting factor for benefiting sentient beings, it's not really physical, but it's mental, right? It's mental. So what do we need to benefit sentient beings? We need to have wisdom, and also to have method. If you don't have wisdom, then you wouldn't know how to benefit someone. If you don't have method aspect, if you don't have the method aspect, then why would you even start to help others, right? So therefore, to really to have the perfect wisdom, and to have a perfect method aspect of the path, is the only answer to have the complete, to have the ability from your side to benefit others fully, from your side, then you have reached all your potential. You have realized all your potential. So Buddhahood is that state, Buddhahood represents that state, and then naturally, then the wishing for Buddhahood then arises. So these are the 7 cause and effect, and then exchanging self with others. Again, it's quite similar, but 이용 관계 기회 tablas, 이용 관계 기회 tablas. So 이용 관계 기회 tab. So both these 2 methods, then they differ in the way that in these exchanging self with others, then I think with that method, then you use that method to go right from the loving kindness, right? To go right from loving kindness, without having to first think about the first 3 causes, but you sort of jump straight. And using that method, then you begin from the 4th cause, right? From the 4th cause, and then the 5th, 6th, and 7th are the same, are the same, right? Is that correct?
You're uniting the 2 methods in the explanation. So you're uniting the 2 methods, the cause and effect method, and equalizing self and others. Is that what you're doing?
No, I'm not. I'm saying that the first cause, the second cause, and the third cause, you leave that completely out, and then you use the exchanging self with others method, and then from that, and then you develop the fourth cause, right, which is loving kindness. Then fifth, great compassion. Then sixth, altruism or special, what? Special, special intention, a special resolve, and then, of course, bodhicitta. So with exchanging self with others, then you forego the first three steps. I think this is my understanding. But please, when you go back, you check.
There's the disadvantages of self-cherishing, the advantages.
No. I'm not talking of that. What I'm saying is that, of course, in the 7 cause and effect, you have the 7 causes, right? But in the exchanging self with others method, you don't go through the first 3 causes. Does that accord with the Lamrim?
Yeah, you don't generate a view of others as having been your mother. You simply on the basis of...
That's exactly what I'm saying. Yes. Is that you skip cause number 1, cause number 2, cause number 3, and you use exchanging self with others method. You use that method to generate loving kindness directly. So you're sort of jumping right into loving kindness using that method without trying to recognize everyone as being your mothers and then their kindness and then repaying that kindness. Is that correct? Okay, then I'm okay because I had some doubts. I thought maybe it was the 3 causes firsthand and then exchanging self with others method and then loving kindness. But then what I explained the first time made more sense. So if you have comments, then later you can, okay. And then with this method, again, it is said to be more advanced, right? Exchanging self with others method is more advanced because you can generate loving kindness directly, without having to go through the first 3 causes. And also, perhaps not trying to not generate loving kindness on the basis that they were your mothers, but being able to generate loving kindness because they are sentient beings, because they are equal in the way that just as you wish for happiness, they also wish for the same. Just as you want to be free from suffering, they also want to be free from suffering. So you are using that, right, directly without having to first sort of like try to sort of like project a pleasant image or something like that, Not try to use the example of our mother and then through that, then try to develop a sense of closeness on that basis. So therefore, this is considered more advanced, more advanced because, yeah. Okay. And then with this method, exchanging the self with others, then when we say exchanging self with others, then in the Lamrim, it always points out it doesn't mean self yourself becomes the others and the others become yourself. That is not the point, When we say exchanging self with others, in the present moment, what we are doing is that we cherish ourselves and we don't cherish others as much, right? So we need to change that, So instead, try to cherish others more and then cherish yourself less than how less than you cherish others, right? So this is what it means to exchange the self with others, and then thinking about the disadvantages or the drawbacks of the self-cherishing mind, right? The drawbacks of self-cherishing, and then thinking about the pros of cherishing others, right? So through this, then we train ourselves to exchange the self with others. Many of our problems, they arise. Maybe they're not so directly connected to ignorance itself, but really to self-cherishing, because we are quite self-centered, then that brings some, it affects our relation, with our loved ones, with our, friends, and with people, generally, I think. Our self-centered approach, many times we don't really, it takes a certain level of self-awareness to understand that, to see that, because if you are always looking out there, then you can never really see what this self-cherishing mind is doing, you can never really understand like the damages the damages of the self cherishing approach, So again, when it comes to all these meditative points, then they're all equal, that they demand, some level of introspection, of looking inwards, right? Of looking into our minds and our thought processes, and how one thought gives rise to the next thought, and how that sort of sets off that chain reaction. So it's important, if you take this seriously, then it is very important that you sort of check yourself, from time to time. Okay. Now, this is, I think, this is today's verse now, right? Verse 15. This is supposed to be starting from today. You're supposed to start from here. Okay. Generosity is the wish-granting jewel with which you can fulfill the hopes of sentient beings. It is the best weapon for cutting the knot of miserliness. It is the altruistic conduct that enhances your self-confidence and undaunted courage. It is the basis for your good reputation to be proclaimed in the 10 directions. Does this sound like a good reason for why we have to be generous? For why we have to be generous? It is the basis for your good reputation to be proclaimed in the 10 directions. Therefore, be generous. But, okay, I will continue reading this. Knowing this, the wise have devoted themselves to the excellent path of completely giving away their body, belongings, and merit. I, the yogi, have practiced just that. You who also seek liberation, please cultivate yourself in the same way.
He sounds prideful.
Excuse me?
He sounds prideful.
Oh. Of course, when I said, is this the reason for why is this the rationale for generosity? I in no way was being critical of Tsongkhapa's intent, but I think he's really, why he is saying this is maybe for really some of the practitioners. If they are sort of said, you should be generous, that way your fame will be proclaimed in the 10 directions, maybe some practitioners might think, then I should really do this, practice generosity. So maybe this is just, Tsongkhapa showing his skillful qualities, skillful qualities. Let's see some of the terms. So there are 3 types of generosity. That is, the first is, it says here, being generous with material things, right? And then being generous with the Dharma, the generosity of giving other fearlessness. So there are 3 types. The first one, being generous with material things, right? This is what we, I think, normally would associate as generosity, right? That if you give material things, if you give possessions to others, then that is how we normally would define being generous as. But here again, we have 3 types, right? So that's just one of the 3. And then the second one is being generous with the Dharma. So that's sharing the Dharma, right? So sharing Dharma is also considered a form of generosity. And then giving other fearlessness, that's saving others, from like a life and death situation, something like that, right? Or giving life, giving life. So like, I think like the paramedics, they do a lot of that, The doctors, the paramedics, especially the paramedics, especially when they're like right there on the spot and in the crucial moment, they're usually like the first responders, right? And then this I think really it's like unsung heroes, right? They are the unsung heroes. So the generosity of giving others fearlessness. So there are 3. So these are the 3 forms of the ways you can be generous, right? So not only with material things, not only with the Dharma, sharing the Dharma, not only by giving fearlessness, but there are 3 ways in which you can practice the first of the 6 perfections. So, I think I forgot to sort of link, to connect. So once you have generated bodhicitta, the wish to seek enlightenment, then what do you have to do, to achieve that? Then, of course, that is, you can only achieve enlightenment by way of practicing the 6 paramitas, or the 6 perfections, of which generosity is the first. So I think this is this is good. And then the second of the 6 is ethical discipline. So with verse number 16, ethical discipline is the water that washes away the stains of faulty actions. It is the ray of moonlight that cools the scorching heat of the defilements. It makes you radiant like a Mount Meru in the midst of the 9 kinds of being. By its power, you are able to bend all beings to your good influence without recourse to mesmerizing glares. Now we are also having that moment, that it is the basis for your good reputation to be proclaimed in the 10 directions moment, right? By its power, you are able to bend all beings to your good influence without recourse to mesmerizing glares. Knowing this, the holy ones have safeguarded, as they would their eyes, the precepts that they have accepted to keep purely. I, the yogi, have practiced just that. You who also seek liberation, please cultivate yourself in the same way. I think what's important, with these 2 reasonings that maybe some of us had some doubts, the first obviously being it is the basis for your good reputation to be proclaimed in the 10 directions. And the second one, I think, was by its power, you are able to bend all beings to your good influence without recourse to mesmerizing glares. These 2, it's very important that when there is a reason given, many times it is not the reason for why you should do it, right? If you practice generosity, you will gain a reputation, right? You do gain good reputation, okay, but that is not the purpose of being generous. It's not to get fame. It's not to become famous, right? So this is not only here, but also in the Vinaya text. They also state these reasons, for upholding your vows, right? So again, these reasons are given like people will respect you, right? One of the vows, one of the benefits, of keeping vows is that people will benefit you, right? They say that. But of course, we should not think that this is the reason for why we should keep our vows, or being famous is not the purpose of being generous. So we need to make this distinction. And when the author, what Jeremiah is doing, because this form of putting some of the purposes in this order is something that has been always done in this order, in this way for centuries and centuries. And Buddha himself in the Vinaya texts says that very clearly. Does that mean that Buddha is telling his monastic order that they should keep their vows so that they will become famous, or that people will give them more food, or give them more respect? Of course not. That's not what he's telling. But what he's just giving out some of the byproducts, of keeping your vows. And if you really keep your vows intact, those are some of the byproducts, even though they are not really the things that we should wish for when upholding the vows. So similarly, if you practice generosity, even if you don't want fame, you will get fame, right? Like with Mother Teresa, with her, with her work, it's beyond doubt that she was doing this for fame. But even though she does not want fame, people are going to appreciate her for her good work, So likewise, if you are a good-hearted person, I think you will be famous too, right? You will become famous, right? At least in your circles, right? At least to the person that know you, you will become famous, right? But that doesn't mean that is like the goal of being a good person. So this is just, I think, stating some byproducts. It's like after effects or like side effects. Maybe Rinpoche is like highlighting the side effects of being generous is that you will become famous even though you don't want fame. So that's like the side effect of practicing generosity. So maybe this is not like saying this is the purpose, but he's just highlighting that. So maybe he's telling us, be careful when practicing generosity, that you don't have these worldly thoughts, that these worldly thoughts don't get to you, right? So side effects of generosity. Okay. And now with patience, right? Number 17. Patience is the best adornment for those with power and the perfect ascetic practice for those tormented by delusions. It is the high soaring eagle as the enemy of the snake of anger and the thickest armor against the weapons of abusive language. Knowing this, the wise have accustomed themselves in various ways and forms to the armor of supreme practice. Either yogi have practiced just that. You who also seek liberation, please cultivate yourself in the same way. So again, previously with ethics, again there are three. The practice of the perfection of ethics, the ethic of refraining from misdeeds, the ethic of gathering virtuous dharma, right? So again, three. And then likewise with patience, again there are three types. The patience of remaining calm in the face of your attacker. This is like the normal patience, the patience as we know it, and then the patience of accepting suffering, the patience of accepting suffering. You mean with patience or ethics? Patience. All right. The first one was the patience of remaining calm in the face of your attacker. The second one is the patience of accepting suffering. The third is the patience to gain assurance in the Dharma. The patience to gain assurance in the Dharma. 출랑에 심기 쇠봤으더라. 출랑에 심기 쇠봤. So the patience to gain assurance in the Dharma. Yeah. So to understand the Dharma, it takes some patience, right? You don't gain assurance in the Dharma right away. So you need to be patient. So that is the third type of patience. Okay, so patience, and then is it from verse number 15 to 18? For today? For today, it's from verse 15 to 18 or 19? 18. Okay. I think it is till 18. Once you wear the armor of resolute and irreversible joyous effort, your expertise in the scriptures and insights will increase like the waxing moon. You will make all your actions meaningful for attaining enlightenment and will bring whatever you undertake to its intended conclusion. Knowing this, the Bodhisattvas have exerted great waves of joyous effort, washing away all laziness. Either yogi have practiced just that. You who also seek liberation, please cultivate yourself in the same way. Perseverance. So, perseverance is explained as, having joy in virtuous actions, right? Having joy in committing virtuous actions. So that is perseverance. Perseverance, yeah. And then what keeps us from persevering? Of course, laziness, right? And there are three types of laziness. The first laziness, I think, is the laziness that we can all associate, right? It's the procrastinating. Procrastination is the first type of laziness, right? Procrastination. So that's good. And then the second type is 자왕예신길레로. So this is the laziness. It's also the laziness we say 자왕예신. That is clinging onto 자왕예바, unproductive deeds, right? So clinging onto unproductive deeds or unproductive actions. That's the second type of laziness. And then the third type of laziness, so the third type of laziness is sort of diminishing one's own ability, right? Is that right? Diminishing your ability, right? Diminishing your ability to think, oh, I cannot do this, right? To think, I cannot meditate. I don't have what it takes to practice a kind heart or like that, to sort of diminish your ability to practice the Dharma. So these are the three types of laziness. Yeah. So procrastination is something that most people can associate as being laziness, right? But the two others is more difficult, So that's important, I think. Yeah. To be able to know the three types of the three forms of laziness. Tsongkhapa door holes on. Okay. So I think we have come to the end of today's verse. What time is it? It's 9:05. It goes until 9:30. Okay. Okay. Maybe we have some question or.
Rinpoche, back to exchanging self for others, and to understand how if there's no self, there's no other, and how that progresses into the understanding or the feeling that the suffering of others is unbearable to us because we accept it as our own suffering.
No, excuse me?
If you could explain the connection between that and how it develops into where the suffering of others becomes unbearable to us as if it's our own suffering. When we see if there is no self, there is no other.
Oh, I see.
And then how that comes to that conclusion or that development in the mind.
So when we say there is no self, then we are referring to the object of negation, right? When there is, in the context of that statement, there is no self or other. Then that self, we are referring to the object of negation, the self-existing object, right? The self-existing object. Self-existence is the Buddhism theory, the Anatman, right? The Atman theory and then the Anatman, right? Those who believe in an essential self then they have the Atman theory, the Atman concept, and then the Buddhist concept is always Anatman. The Buddhist concept is always Anatman, no self. So when we say no self, we mean there is no essential existence, right? Or there is no substantial existence. There is no objective existence. So this is what we mean when we say there is no self. Now, in the context of exchanging self for others, then that self is not the self as in no self, but this is the self as in myself. So exchanging myself with others, for others, right? What was your question?
If we say there is no self, and the other is based upon the identity, it's like from here or there. If we go there, they turn positions. And so if there's no I, then there's no identity to point.
There is I. There is I.
There is, yeah.
Yeah, so we don't say there is no I. We say there is I exist.
Yes.
I.
But other is based upon, the designation of other is based upon the designation of I.
The designation of other is based on a designation of I. I don't think so.
Like if I'm standing here, and Carrie is over there. If I go over there, I'm there, and Carrie is, that becomes here, and this is there.
Right.
We can switch back and forth. And so like with the idea of designating I, then other is based upon that. And my feeble understanding in the Abhidharma is that this being able to switch is merely labeled, that by accepting the label of I and other, then we're able somehow to then see that their suffering becomes unbearable because we see it as our own. Like there's no difference between us in this exchanging self for others.
My understanding of exchanging self for others is instead of cherishing ourselves, then instead of doing that, we should begin to cherish others,
yes, yeah.
Right?
But this like advances that view to where we see their suffering is completely unbearable to us. Because
if you can exchange yourself with others, then of course that becomes unbearable. Yeah.
Yes. So that's good enough, I think.
I'm sorry. I'm not a very smart person, so
that puts me in real trouble.
저거 가르긴 저거 고스마스.
Conventionally, I the other yoro, self other yoro. Ultimately, I the other ni yomaro. The relation in jet to was.
근데사.
Randa she is a kevase. Kunzo on the channel yoro. Tadamu on the channel yomaro.
Can you please give him the mic?
So that's my interpretation. I think basically what he is asking is, conventionally there is a difference between self and others, but from the point of ultimate truth, there is no difference between I and self. They are just mere labeling. So in that way, he's asking we can exchange self and others in that way.
Now we have to go over this again. This is important.
Try.
Yeah.
It's like it sort of goes back to the idea of here and there.
Okay, here and there.
They're just mere labels for this location.
Okay.
Like this is here, and that's there.
Okay.
But if I go over there, that becomes here, and this becomes there.
Oh, all right.
And so in the context of the identity of I and other, we should be able to switch. And there's no reason not to call this I and this other. And
but they're different, right? I mean...
And so to be able to...
I would say like that's the other side of the room, but if I walk to that side, then I would be saying, this is the other side, and this is my side, and this is the other side.
Exactly.
Right? So likewise, then where do you apply that analogy?
And so we apply that to self and other, where they say there's no reason not to call Punsok I.
But you wouldn't call that. I mean, Pinzog is not me, right?
But the relationship to the labeling we should be able to switch the labels.
How?
Just because it's a label, just like here and there.
But then you're like sort of breaking the rules of conventional truth. I mean, there is an other person and there is me,
yeah.
But I mean, of course, I'm just a mere label and the other person is a mere label. But that doesn't mean the other person is me and I am the other person, right?
No, it's not saying that. But the attitude then becomes that the suffering of others is unbearable to me because I see no difference between self and other. It's the attitude of the mind where I'm not physically changing other, but the attitude becomes very strong that there's no difference between us. So his suffering becomes unbearable to me as if it were my own.
Yes.
And so there's
true.
this.
That is true.
So this ability to immerse myself into trying to help.
Yes, that is true. Yes. That, yes, you're right. You're right. With this approach, then it you're closer. That you can bring, you can get to this point of then really sort of, getting over that divide of me and them. That far distance, and especially the way you put it. Yes. Now I see the point. Yes, thank you. Thank you. This is very important, yes.
Thank you, Rinpoche. My question is in regards to verse 15. I believe it's the third sentence to the last, starting with knowing this. Knowing this, the wise have devoted themselves to the excellent path of completely giving away their body, belongings, and merit. And my question is specifically in regards to giving away your body. I've read or heard somewhere that the Buddha Shakyamuni fed himself to hungry tigers or something like that in the past life, but it's not very practical for us to do that in this life. So how do we give away our bodies? So is it like doing physical labor or something for other people?
Yeah, I think that's right. Yes. Geshe Pinso, what Geshe Pinso said, donating organs. Yes. Right? Yes, give blood. Yes. Thank you. Yes. I'm so fortunate that I have helpers around, and I can just sort of just rest and let them do the hard work. So thank you. Oh, please. Oh, the mic. Yeah.
Rinpoche, thank you. In that regard, in terms of giving away our bodies, what's the situation where a person donates their cadaver to science? And my understanding is they harvest your organs as soon as you're died. So what about our consciousness and moving on to the next, our consciousness moving on to the next level, whatever that might be?
Now, I think that's a difficult question, and especially it has to do, I think, more with tantra. Now we are going more into higher tantra. So honestly, I don't really know. I don't really know this situation. So I'm sorry. Thank you. But if I may add something, then I think when we are clinically dead, right? And if you want to donate our body, for study, for scientific studies, which could benefit, people in the long run, then we should do it. We should not have doubts about whether my mind will still be in my body and then have create further complications. I think that's more practical, When we are clinically dead, then that's the point. That's where that's where you say, because if you really have some doubts, then if it is possible, you could maybe ask the person if it would be all right to live maybe for 3 or 4 days, and then afterwards then give for scientific studies. That's probably not possible, right? That's not.
They do it almost before.
Sometimes
I don't know anything about it, but my assumption is when you're clinically dead or declared dead, then they would start to harvest your organs. Essentially thinks it could happen before you're clinically dead, so I don't know.
But if you can do this, then I think if you're doing this, for the benefit of others, then this is definitely a bodhisattva act. And I cannot like judge that as being negative, or I shouldn't sort of like advise someone not to do it, because if you're doing this for a good cause, and if this is beneficial, then it's really your decision, right? Your decision, and I as a third person, I think that this is the right thing to do, if it's really beneficial. Thank you.
Thank you, Rinpoche.
Oh.
So it's my understanding that all things are dependently arisen, therefore empty. But not all things are impermanent. So I was wondering if you could give us the list of the things that are permanent.
What?
The things that are permanent.
Oh. Things. When we say things like, do we accept that all phenomena are things? Or not?
Well,
how do you define
okay.
a thing?
Okay. Well, so is, well, just there's everything that
exactly.
exists.
When we say everything,
Okay.
are we including all phenomena? If we are, okay,
Yeah,
then
they're-
fine.
Yeah,
Then
they're empty.
then not everything is impermanent, right? Or what
Well,
was your question?
Because I thought, my understanding was if everything's dependently arisen, then everything must be impermanent.
Oh, I see.
But I've heard there are a few things that are permanent,
all right.
like our mind stream,
Uh-huh.
or, or,
Mind stream. Mind stream is permanent?
are eternal. I mean, are some,
I
what
think-
is it that,
I think mind stream is an impermanent object. But this is still, and this is a point of debate. It is. You're right. It is. That is a debated subject. But usually we would say mind stream is impermanent. It's not permanent.
okay, well, what is it that's eternal?
How do you define eternal?
Oh, boy.
If you want something, you have to
Because
really
it's
make it
just
clear.
like today, someone was mentioning that
conceptual image.
were permanent, and I that was shocking to me. How is that possible?
Yeah. For the Geshe program, they study like for over 20 years, right? And they start with this text called the collected topics. The collected topics. And in here, that's where we learn the permanent objects and the impermanent objects. That's where we learn all that taxonomy, right? And this is very useful, especially in Madhyamaka. Because if you don't have the basis that is explained in the collected topics, then I think as you go higher and higher and higher, then you come across all these hurdles. I think that already, the texts on collected topics, I think they've already been translated into English. And I think that if we take some time to learn those, then this helps us, overcome some of the hurdles when it comes to these sort of things, right? So collected topics, I would strongly recommend that here for anyone who hasn't studied them. I think in the master's program you have that, right? You have that already in English, and so if you find the texts, then this might be good. The collected topics. But again, I reiterate, I reiterate that mental image is a permanent object, right? When we think of permanent, we should not think it's like eternal or like it has always been there since the beginning of time or something like that. That's not how we define permanent, a permanent object, a permanent phenomena. There are two types of permanent phenomena. One is something that is always existing, and then one is that goes on and off, that goes on and off. So there are two types of permanent objects, right? One that is always existing. For example, existence itself is a permanent phenomena, and it has always been existing, right? Existence itself is a permanent phenomena, and it is a always existing permanent phenomena. And then the other type, which is on and off, right? It exists at a point, and in another point, it does not exist. So I think mental image falls into this category. Or, when we talk about space, then again we talk of two space, right? There is the conditioned space, and then there is the unconditioned space. We would use the word namka, which is, I think, the closest English word would be probably space, right? So conditioned space would be like the gap between us. So this is conditioned space, and then unconditioned space is within this gap. If I like move, my hands, if I move in this gap, I don't hit into any gross objects, right? So the absence of like hitting a gross object in this gap, right? In this space that exists between us would be the unconditioned space, and therefore a permanent phenomena. And this is also not something that always exists, but it only exists within this space, within this conditioned space. So this is what we learn, some of the things that we learn in the first 2 years of collected topics before we start learning Pramana Vartika. So, like 16-year-olds and 17-year-olds, they are taught these abstract ideas from a very young age, so that when they, reach the higher classes, then there won't be sort of any like hurdles or blocks, things that might make us, like do a double take, sort of thing. But again, these collected topics, one interesting thing to note is that they are called collected topics because they were taken from pramana. They were collected. They were selected topics. Mostly, they were collected from the pramana text, which is like Buddhist epistemology. But it is really more than that, because to say pramana is Buddhist epistemology, I think really is an understatement, because it contains much more than it's more expansive, right? And it also touches not only just epistemology, but it also touches upon those very abstract ideas, right, of impermanent and permanent, and positive and negative, and others. So conceptual image, they are permanent, but not always existing permanent. When our conceptual mind switches off for a moment, that mental image stops existing. But as soon as we have this thought again, it is there. It is there. But the mind to which this image appears, or the projector of that image, is considered impermanent, but the image itself is permanent. So, yes, thank you. Oh,
Impermanence is dependent on an object?
oh, just 1 minute. Oh, please. I think
I'm sorry. Thank you, Rinpoche. So my question is, so Rinpoche said without renunciation, everything, even good thing we do only ends in samsara, right? So my question is the Buddha's teaching has a special effect like I take the teaching, even I don't have the renunciation, will this teaching eventually lead me to the enlightenment?
I think so.
Okay.
Yes, definitely.
Can you, why elaborate it a little bit? Why?
Oh, why?
Even without renunciation.
I'm not saying that without renunciation you will become enlightened. I'm not saying that. But even though we do not have renunciation at this point, by listening to the teachings and contemplating on the teachings of the Buddha, we are nevertheless planting seeds, right? And also strengthening many of the seeds that we already have, right? We already have. So I think that's why it is.
Can I understand this way,
Please.
With the Buddha teaching? It's okay. Okay, closer. Okay. So even I don't have renunciation now. With the Buddha's teaching, like it's a seed. Eventually, I will have renunciation, and eventually it will lead to liberation. Can I understand?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Rinpoche.
Thank you. This is absolutely correct. Yes. Oh, so we have reached our time limit. I think now we have to maybe have like a vote and say, should we add like maybe 5 minutes or okay. And then after 5 minutes we'll have another vote.
I was wondering, when you were talking about how it's hard to identify the moment that ignorance arises in your mind, could you give an example of when you've identified that in yourself? Or could you give a practical example of recognizing the moment when ignorance would arise? Could you kind of paint the picture for me of how you would do that?
Could I give an example of when an ignorance arises?
Yeah, because you said that it's hard to recognize the moment when ignorance arises in your mind.
Mm-hmm.
Could you give an example of what that would be like?
What that would be like?
Yeah.
Like when ignorance arises.
Yeah.
What that's like.
Yeah.
But that's difficult. Excuse me? Oh, anger is good, but you're not asking about, you're asking about the hard one, right. I mean, with that category, categorizing phenomena as permanent and impermanent. That is more easy than addressing this kind of issue, because the other one is like this is that, finish, right? There's no more question, right? But this is like now you have to not only use like some understanding, but you need to really get your experience, right? You need to bring in your experience. So I think each of us, we need to think, we need to think. We need to think how we understand things, how we approach things, right? And we have to see how we label things and how we give this importance, right? How we give this importance to existence. I think I mentioned a few days back that maybe, when we are a little calm and we look around, then we are seeing things, right? We are seeing things. We are seeing the people, the objects in this room, and if any thoughts arise, thinking, oh, there's the clock, there's the tanga, there's the TV, there's the person, and there's so and so. If you think like this, then we are not rejecting that. We are not saying this is ignorance. We are not saying that these thoughts are apprehending a self-existing attribute. We are not saying that, And as you, in the afternoon session with the last question, I think maybe this is one point where, Rinpoche's explanation, teachings differ from some of the earlier schools. Maybe not all, but some of the earlier schools, of how we differentiate between a valid thought and a self-grasping thought, right? Where we differentiate, where we make that distinction. So these thoughts like, oh, there's a book here, right? There's a person there. All of those are valid thoughts, right? Valid thoughts. We do not negate those thoughts, neither the thoughts nor their apprehended objects, because their apprehended objects are valid in the sense that they exist maybe conventionally, but still they exist. So we are not denying that existence nor the subjective experience of those existing objects, right? So this we have to be very clear from the onset. Otherwise, that might sort of, that might hinder us, later. Because sometimes, like you have to sort of set up the premise, right? The premise, the premises. You sort of need to set the premises. Otherwise, you cannot reach a conclusion, right? Without premises, is that right? Premises? Oh, without premise, then you cannot reach a conclusion. So we do have to set some premise, because as with logic, without premise, then you cannot come to a conclusion. This is like a common feature of all logics, whether they are sound or erroneous. That's a common feature. So even in Rinpoche's understanding, in his explanation, there is that rule, right? So this is one point, and then ignorance or self-grasping mind is that when we start to give a certain level of importance onto those objects, right? So first, they merely appears, right? They merely appear. That's fine. But then something goes on, right? We start to or like sort of hold onto the objects. We sort of hold onto that, right? Sort of cling onto them, right? Maybe this is where the self-grasping bit comes in, right? This is where the self-grasping starts, when we sort of try to hold onto the object as being real, like truly existing. When you see them, of course you always see everything as a truly existing object. But as you see that, and then to also apprehend in the same manner as you're seeing them, that's when you have grasped at this self, right? Self as in the object of negation, self as in a substantial quality, right? Or a substantial, the substantial or the essential substance, right? So this is very good, you know. I see many nods in the room, so I'm getting some feedback. I like that, right? But if you try to see this as self-grasping mind arises, this is the difficult thing. So first we have to know the theory before we sort of, you know, try to test it, right? So this is the theory. And now it's up to you to analyze that theory, whether it's a sound theory or not, right? Whether this is how we approach, whether this is how we approach the objects, you know, whether this is how we objectify things. So, thank you. And I think I took 10 minutes explaining just that. I took just 10 minutes. And last question, Lobsang.
I just, I'm assuming that impermanence is not a permanent factor because it's dependent on objects.
Excuse me?
So impermanence is not a permanent factor because it's dependent on objects?
Not only that, not that. Then you would have to say that permanent phenomena are not dependent origination, right? But all phenomena are dependent origination. So we make this distinction that in the lower schools, if it is dependent origination, it has to be impermanent, right? Whereas in the Madhyamika system, then there is no contradiction, right? That it can be a dependent origination and it can also be permanent, right? So all phenomena are dependent origination according to the Madhyamika view. In the lower schools, then all dependent origination are considered impermanent in nature. So this distinction, this is like a unique quality, you know, that how being permanent and at the same time being a dependent origination are not contradictive. That is a unique feature of Madhyamika system, you know, of the Madhyamika system. So thank you, and thank you all, you know, for your questions. Thank you so much, and have a good night.
Nanda Shin Lai Chö